Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. You're standing right in the middle of a glittering desert metropolis. You look up and there are these massive glass skyscrapers just piercing the clouds. Luxury cars are parked on every single corner. You're walking through these sprawling, perfectly climate-controlled malls that literally make you forget you're standing in one of the harshest, absolutely hottest environments on the planet, right? Most of us look at these modern Gulf empires and we just see invincible wealth, incredible engineering, unshakable stability. But underneath all that glass and steel, their entire existence hangs by a surprisingly fragile thread. So today, we're unpacking the hidden, fatal vulnerability of modern desert empires. And to make this super complex geopolitical web crystal clear, we're going to break it all down using a few really simple classroom analogies.
All right, let's take a quick look at today's lesson plan. We'll start with the desert mirage, move into the water weakness, check out the asymmetric math problem, and then wrap up with what we call the global heart attack.
So what actually holds a desert empire together? To really wrap our heads around this, I want you to imagine something for a second. Picture a state-of-the-art, billion-dollar high school. I'm talking the absolute best computers money can buy, jaw-dropping architecture, top-tier sports facilities, the works. But it's built smack in the middle of a scorching, barren desert. And the designers? Well, they somehow totally forgot to put in any water fountains or internal plumbing. That incredibly expensive high-tech school? That's basically exactly what we're looking at with modern Gulf states. Everything looks flawless on the surface, but the absolute most foundational element of basic human survival is completely missing.
Which brings us right to Section 1, the desert mirage, and this grand illusion of independence. Honestly, what's truly staggering here is the sheer scale of the imbalance keeping these cities alive. Look at that massive 90% chunk of imported food. Since these nations are basically geographical anomalies with next to zero natural agriculture, 9 out of every 10 meals eaten there have to be brought in from the outside world. And almost all of that crucial food creeps through a tiny, incredibly vulnerable 21-mile-wide geographical bottleneck known as the Strait of Hormuz. It's a seriously precarious lifeline. But back to our high school analogy, a student can totally survive for a bit if the cafeteria suddenly runs out of imported snacks, right? You make do, you ration. But where you absolutely cannot survive without is water. And that leads us directly to their absolute greatest vulnerability. Part 2, the water weakness, or the unfixable switch.
So back at our billion-dollar desert high school with no internal plumbing or natural water sources, they actually have to manufacture their hydration. A whopping 60% of the daily drinking water for these nations is literally manufactured in massive, stationary seawater processing factories sitting right out back along the coast. They don't have vast lakes, no deep aquifers. They are completely reliant on these sprawling, highly visible, incredibly complex desalination plants running 24/7, just to keep their populations alive.
This right here creates what's known as the desalination trap. It's this profound strategic vulnerability where an entire population's survival relies heavily on a few fragile pipes and exposed industrial centers instead of, robust natural resources. If an adversary targets those massive stationary processing plants, 60% of a country's drinking water can just vanish in seconds. Think about that. You don't need to roll tanks across a border to conquer the city anymore. You literally just need to break the external water machine that keeps everyone from dying of thirst. And that sudden kind of chilling realization introduces a totally new kind of conflict. Let's move into part 3, the asymmetric math problem. Now, to potentially exploit this very specific trap, rival nations in the region, like Iran, as noted in our source material, have developed deeply specialized military strategies. One of the main ones is called the Mosaic Doctrine. Now, think of this exactly like a school group project. Usually, if the team leader gets sick or goes home, the whole project totally falls apart, right? Nobody else knows what to do. But under the Mosaic Doctrine, Iran intentionally divides its military into 31 independent commands. It's as if every single student in the classroom has the full instructions for the project. So even if the central government, like the teacher or the team leader, gets taken out of the equation, the project still gets finished by those 31 independent members. They're decentralized, highly autonomous, and honestly, virtually impossible to stop all at once.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of the asymmetric math problem defining modern warfare. The weapon of choice for these decentralized commands is the Shahed drone, which costs roughly $20,000 a pop to make. That cheap, easily mass-produced weapon is then matched up against the standard defense mechanism, US-made Patriot interceptors, used to track and shoot them out of the sky. But here's the kicker. Those interceptor missiles cost a staggering $4 million per shot.
$4 million. Let's put that massive number right back into our classroom context. It is literally like someone maliciously throwing a 50-cent spitball at the school's only water machine, and the only way the school can possibly block that spitball is by throwing a pristine $4 million textbook directly into its path. Every single time a cheap little spitball is thrown, the school loses yet another $4 million textbook. Eventually, the school is going to go completely bankrupt long before the students run out of paper to chew up. Looking at this impartially, purely as a brutal equation of infrastructure and logistics, it's a mathematical conflict that the big, expensive defense systems are just bound to lose over a long enough timeline. You've got an endless supply of easily mass-produced $20,000 drones facing off against highly expensive, extremely limited defense systems. Eventually, no matter how ridiculously rich the nation is, the defender will just run out of $4 million textbooks to throw. And when that exact moment happens, the water machine gets hit. And if even one of those cheap drones slips through the net, the aftermath is horrifying. We aren't talking about a standard water main break or a leaky pipe you can quickly patch up with heavy-duty duct tape. You absolutely cannot patch a high-tech, multi-billion-dollar desalination plant overnight. If those core processing units are destroyed, experts estimate it takes an agonizing 6 to 12 months just to get the manufactured water flowing again. That leaves millions of people trapped in a searing desert metropolis with zero municipal drinking water for up to an entire year. It is literally an unavoidable kill switch for a modern nation. All right, let's see how this deeply localized vulnerability builds from a regional water crisis into a total global meltdown in our final section, the global heart attack. Because we live in such an intensely interconnected world, this hyper-targeted infrastructure siege wouldn't just stay in the desert. It would immediately trigger a global panic. First, the water shuts off, instantly creating an unprecedented humanitarian crisis that halts all normal civil and industrial operations. Second, because those daily operations halt, the 20% of the world's global oil supply that crucially passes through the Strait of Hormuz, it stops moving entirely. Third, that sudden, catastrophic oil freeze sends devastating shockwaves across the whole planet, crashing the global economy and directly threatening the petrodollar system, which is the very financial system that's anchored the United States economy since 1974. A broken water pipe halfway across the world literally empties wallets everywhere else. This really highlights a profound, honestly terrifying shift in how we need to view modern global conflict. In asymmetric warfare, the ultimate objective isn't necessarily rolling heavy tanks across a contested border to plant a flag and physically conquer territory. The most devastating, economically crushing strategy is far, far simpler. You just turn off the life support of an entire nation. You break the fragile, highly exposed infrastructure that makes their miraculous modern life possible. We're designing these incredible, glittering metropolises that rely entirely on highly fragile, exposed technologies just to provide the bare minimum of drinking water. So, as our world gets increasingly complex and profoundly interconnected, we really have to seriously ask ourselves, are we building cities, or are we just building incredibly expensive, ticking time bombs?